Hello, it's me, the Geeky Libertarian. Welcome to the next episode of 15-Minute Game Show Reviews. I know I said I would make a new video in June, but I was working on other stuff then, and I decided that I'm just going to make these review videos at my own discretion. Also, you might have noticed that I no longer have my full beard. Well, after losing 120 pounds, I decided it was time to show off my pretty face. But I digress. Anyway, you know how we do things. I'll talk about the history of the show, go over gameplay, and talk about how I'd revive the show if I had the opportunity.
Bet it big, bet it bold. Your cards can win a pot of gold on Card Shark.
Time for a review of one of the best but underrated game shows of all time. It's been in reruns for over 25 years, but it's still beloved by many to this day. Also, I want to point out that I won't be reviewing the god-awful 2001 revival. I actually like to pretend that version never happened. Anyway, the original Card Sharks debuted on NBC on April 24th, 1978, and ran until October 23rd, 1981. 4.5 years later, the show was brought back on CBS and ran from January 6, 1986 to March 31st, 1989. Also, a syndicated version debuted in September of 1986 and ran for 1 year. The host of the original version on NBC was Jim Perry. For those who don't know, Jim was a staple on both Canadian and American television for over 30 years. He began hosting game shows in Canada in 1965 with the series Fractured Phrases. In 1972, he became the host of the CTV game show Headline Hunters, which was held for 9 years. In 1974, he became announcer of the CTV series Definition, and after a few weeks, he became host and remained so until its cancellation in 1989, making it Canada's longest-running game show. Jim also hosted the Miss Canada pageant from 1967 to 1990. In the U.S., in addition to Card Sharks, Jim hosted Sale of the Century, which ran on NBC from 1983 to 1989, with a syndicated version running from January 1985 to September 1986. Jim passed away in 2015 at the age of 82. The host of the CBS revival was Bob Eubanks. Bob is a man who needs no introduction, but that's what I do. Bob was born in Michigan but grew up in Pasadena, California, where he later became a DJ in Los Angeles. In 1966, he began his most famous role as the host of the long-running The Newlywed Game, which he hosted on 4 different occasions as recently as 1999. He even appeared as a guest host on the recent Game Show Network revival. Other game shows hosted by Bob include The Diamond Head Game, which he said he hated, Dream House, and Trivia Trap. From 1976 to 2016, he co-hosted the annual Tournament of Roses Parade on KTLA in Los Angeles. He also made appearances on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and in the movie Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. The host of the short-lived syndicated version was Bill Raftery. Bill was born in Queens, New York, and served in the United States Army. His first national exposure came on the NBC reality series Real People, where he was a roving reporter. Other game shows he hosted included Every Second Counts and a 1987 revival of Blockbusters. In 2007, Bill hosted Retired and Wired on the RLTV network. Bill passed away in 2012 due to heart failure at the age of 68. But I am happy to say that I had the pleasure of meeting Bill on Facebook and chatting with him in the last few months of his life. The announcer on all 3 versions was Gene Wood. Game show fans should recognize that name. Gene was born in Massachusetts and majored in speech and theater at Emerson College. His early career included stand-up comedy and television commercials, and he worked on Captain Kangaroo. His first game show announcing gig came on the 1960s version of Supermarket Sweep. 3 years later, he began a long association with Mark Goodson Bill Todman Productions, where he was the announcer on Beat the Clock, which he briefly hosted until its cancellation in 1972. Other game shows he announced for include Family Feud, Tattletales, Password Plus, the match game Hollywood Squares Hour, Super Password, Love Connection, Win, Lose, or Draw, and the first season of the Family Channel game show Family Challenge. In the 1990s, Gene also did voiceovers for the Game Show Network. Gene passed away in 2004. The show also had several female dealers over the years. One of the dealers on Jim Perry's version was the then unknown Markie Post. The models on Bob and Bill's versions were Lacey Pemberton and Susanna Williams. Now let's get on to gameplay. Two contestants, one usually a returning champion, competed. Each player had their own deck of 52 oversized playing cards, which were shuffled and cut by the players before the audience before going on the air. The first 5 cards were dealt out for each player. The champion or champion designate played the red cards on the top row, while the challenger played the blue cards on the bottom row. Before contestants could play their cards, they first had to answer a toss-up question. The questions were all based on polls of 100 people, all of whom were typically in a common demographic group or the same profession, marital status, etc. Here's an example.
We asked 100 married women, if your husband gave you a dozen roses, would you feel flattered or suspicious? How many women said they would be suspicious?
After the question was asked, the player in control would predict how many of those 100 people would have responded. Their opponent was then asked whether he or she thought the actual number was higher or lower than the previous contestant's response. Whoever was correct got to play their cards first. Starting in 1980, a $500 bonus was given to the player who provided the exact number of people who responded. In the 80s versions, 2 additional types of questions were played. One was an educated guess, which were general knowledge questions with numerical answers. Originally, the answers could only be between 0 and 99 due to the limitations of the contestants' displays, but this was later changed and could be any number by having the number superimposed over the display. An exact guess still awarded $500. The other question was a poll of 10 specific people from the studio audience. If the contestant guessed the exact number of audience members who made a certain response to one of the questions, they won a $100 bonus, and the poll group split $100. After the question, the player who answered correctly saw their base card and had the option to either play that card or change it with the next card off the top of the deck, which they then had to play. The contestant then guessed whether the next card in the row was higher or lower than the one preceding it, and kept control as long as they guessed correctly. If they made an incorrect call, or if it was the same card, such as 2 aces in a row, they lost control and lost all their cards back to the base card, at which point their opponent was given a free chance to play their cards, but they didn't have the opportunity to change it first. Either contestant could also elect to freeze their position if they were unsure of the next card. This would both prevent their opponent from playing and reset the contestant's base card to the frozen card, and whatever cards that were turned over in that instance could not be taken away. If neither player could call their cards correctly, or if one player chose to freeze, play continued with another toss-up question. Each round had a maximum of 4 questions. If neither player had cleared their row of cards by then, the last question became sudden death, and the player who won the question had the option to play their cards or force their opponent to play their cards without changing. Any missed call resulted in the opponent winning the game. Also, on the last season of the NBC version, a $500 bonus was given to a player who called all their cards correctly without freezing. Neither revival had this rule, though. Matches were the best 2 games out of 3. If a third game was needed, then only 3 cards were dealt out for the players, and there were a maximum of 3 questions. In 1988, the tiebreaker became sudden death, and only 1 question was asked. The controlling contestant was then shown both their base card and their opponent's base card, and they had the option to play or pass, with a wrong call meaning game over. On the network versions and the first 4 weeks of the syndicated version, each game was worth $100. But beginning on September 29, 1986, on the syndicated version, cards with prizes and cash amounts were added to each player's deck. When a prize card was revealed, the prize would be placed at the other end of the board. The contestant then played the next card off the top of the deck. If a contestant won the match, they won the prizes they had accumulated, if any. The winner of the match went on to play the money cards. The money cards consisted of a total of 8 cards dealt out on 3 levels. In the original version, contestants were only allowed to change their base cards. On the 80s versions, 3 cards were dealt off to the side. Originally, the player could change their cards at will, even up to using all 3 on 1 card, but this was later changed to just 1 card per line. The contestant playing the money cards was staked with money before the round began and would use that money to wager with as they attempted to correctly call their cards. They were spotted with $200 on the first row and bet that money as they made their predictions. When they moved up to the second row, they received another $200, or in the 80s versions $400, and then played the cards on that row. Minimum bets were $50 each time until they reached the final card called the Big Bet. There they had to wager at least half the money they had at that point. Originally in the money cards, if a duplicate card showed up, they lost their wager. However, after a 1980 episode where all 4 threes in the deck came up simultaneously, the rule was changed so that they neither won or lost money, or as Bob and Bill called it, pushed. If a contestant busted on the first row, the card they lost on was immediately moved up to the next row with the additional money given to the player so they could continue. If they busted again, however, the game was over. The most a contestant could win in the NBC version of the money cards was $28,800, and it was won once. The 80s version's top prize was $32,000, but it was not won. Finally, the 80s versions also gave the champion a chance to win a car. They received 1 joker for winning the match, and 3 additional jokers were shuffled into their money cards deck. After the money cards part was over, the champion was shown a row of 7 cards. Behind one was the word car. The player placed their joker or jokers on the cards they thought contained the word car. During the weeks when kids played, a trip to Hawaii was offered, and they were spotted with at least 2 jokers. On July 4th, 1988, and for the rest of the CBS run, the car game was replaced with an audience poll question with the 10 people in the audience from the front game. The contestant then marked their guess with a dial on the board with numbers ranging from 0 to 10. A correct guess won the car. Being off by 1 either way awarded a consolation prize of $500. And that's how Card Sharks was played. Now we grade it. What else can be said about this show that hasn't been said already? It was a great but underrated and criminally short-lived game show. In fact, I'm surprised it's not still on the air now. The gameplay was simple, and the questions were always fun because you never knew how the people would have responded to them. The rest is all in the cards, and you just have to hope they go your way. The only fault I have was the original rule for the money cards where a player lost their wager on a duplicate. Luckily, the later versions made the rules more favorable to the player. Another reason Card Sharks was great was because of the hosts. Bob Eubanks and Bill Rafferty were both good hosts, but I have to give extra credit to Jim Perry. Jim seemed to be more in his element here, and he always made the money cards exciting. Bill Rafferty did a good job as well, and he had a good sense of humor. And Bob Eubanks was a good host too, but he didn't really build up the excitement like Jim or Bill did. That being said, Card Sharks was a great show, good hosts, and it gets a solid A. Now the part where I talk about how I'd revive the show if I had the chance. I would basically leave everything as it was and use the rules from the 80s versions, but with increased prize money. Getting a question on the nose awarded $1,000, and winning a game is worth $500. The money cards would use the rules from the 80s version, and the top prize would be $80,000, and I would also have the original car game. As for host, I'd go with Alfonso Ribeiro because I thought he did a great job with Catch-21, and I'd pair him with Burton Richardson as the announcer. That does it for another game show review. I'll be back soon with another review of a classic game show. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at LibertyGeek83 and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until then, this is the Geeky Libertarian saying, live long and prosper.